got a little window.
You got a little window?
Working.
You should. Oops. Okay. If you go there, you should be able to see us now. Actually, hold on. I'm just gonna. Can you speak real quick? I want to make sure we don't have any echo.
Hello. How are you?
I'm gonna interrupt you. Yeah. Okay. It's fine.
I am. Hello.
Hello. Okay. Now stop talking, and I'm going to listen in. And
hello.
Hello. Okay. Now stop talking, and I'm going to listen in. And
hello.
Okay. I think we're good. I think we're balanced. I'm gonna turn me down a bit, so not super loud. Now recording the DialogBoxLive.
I don't actually see you, by the way.
What?
Am I supposed to see you? Supposed to?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me hold on. Let me refresh. Make sure everything's working. So if you go to twitch.tv/diregoldfish.
Oh, should I be looking at you there, not in Google Hangouts?
Yes.
Got it. I'm still in Google Hangouts.
No, yeah, you won't be able to see me there. The reason for that is something I don't really understand. I can't have a video go both to OBS, which goes to Twitch, and also go to Google Hangouts.
Okay. So what was the URL again?
It should be twitch.tv/diregoldfish.
TV/diregoldfish.
Mm-hmm. And there's some people in the chat already somehow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I just tweeted it out. Let me get it.
Oh, it's laggy, so I can't.
Just tweeted it out. All right.
It's laggy, so I can't.
You have to turn off the audio though. All right. Because I can hear it. It's looping through.
Yeah. Okay, that's better.
There we go. And I'm going to tell that Discord we're doing this. And that should be the last thing I got to do. Then we can talk.
Okay, so yeah, the lag makes it a little weird. I probably shouldn't look at you.
Okay.
Because it's you from 20 seconds ago.
Yeah, this is not a good setup. There's theoretically better ways to do this that I don't fully understand. Let me move this up. Okay. But that lets you see roughly what we look like. Okay. So now we're live on Twitch. The next step is we figure out what we want to talk about, and then I tell you we start now, and then we speak. And then I just clip that down and rip the audio, and that becomes the podcast. Oh, you're standing so still. I was worried that the video feed broke.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to get the right position of my head.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to center myself, but with a lag.
I see. This is fun. Okay. This is the internet. Right. So we can talk about anything. I want to ask you about like who you are in your career. I have your resume, which you sent along, which is incredibly intimidating. You've owned a company longer than I've been in the industry. So.
My intention was not to intimidate you, but I'm happy that that was the result.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. You want to just dive right in? You want to just start?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're ready. Does somebody need to do the clapper?
Yeah, you do it, and then I'll start.
I don't actually have one.
You don't have a clapper? Oh, we gotta fake it?
No.
All right.
That was me 30 seconds ago.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, after I say your name, just say hi, and then from there, there's no script. We just go, right?
Okay.
All right, welcome to the Dialogue Box. I'm Gwen Frey, and today I'm joined with Mike Arkin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to be here. Good to be still doing this. I'm really glad you're here to join us. This is actually really intimidating. You've owned a company longer than I've been in the industry. You've been around for a really long time.
It's not that impressive. It just means I'm more tired and slightly more overweight than you. So
A little more jaded.
just tired and older.
Yeah.
Very, very jaded. I think I've been jaded for a long time though. So, but this industry will do that to you.
Yeah. How quickly did you become jaded?
No, it took a while. Probably took about 10, 15 years.
Oh yeah. All right, let's go back then. Where'd you get started? How did you get into
Where did I
here?
get started? Actually, thank you for asking that. I love telling the story. Um, in 1987, I was a college dropout, and I was just kind of like looking for a job, and I ended up at this kind of crappy, I'm not going to stay here long computer rental company. And I don't know, on my second week, I went to Acclaim to deliver a Mac, and I walked in, and the president of the company was a guy named Rob Holmes. And he was on the phone with a friend of his, so he asked me to wait, and I overheard him saying, "Hey, I can't decide if I want to buy a Mercedes SL or a BMW M6." And in my head, I'm thinking, I want to work somewhere where people make decisions like that. And you
So
know,
hold up, you joined the industry to get rich?
uh, I was 18.
Yeah, all
What
right.
did I know? What did I know? So I just when he got off the phone, we did our business, and I said, hey, I'd love to work here. And this is not the kind of job interview technique that's easy to repeat. So this isn't necessarily advice. This is just a story. But that the other founder of the company, a guy named Greg Fishback, came in. He started talking about games he'd worked on at Activision, and I played them all. So we just got into this conversation about games, and I just said, "Look, I want to work here." And he said, "Okay." Um, and it was kind of crazy. I mean, I was 18. I didn't know anything, and they stuck me in a cube with a Nintendo. Uh,
Were there other games around back? Like, was this a career path you knew about when you got started, or were you like, I didn't know people could do this?
well, I
Like,
mean, like when I was in high school, everybody played games. I had an Atari 800, and everyone in my homeroom class had an Atari 800, right? Like there was like the Commodore 64 homeroom, and there was like the Apple II homeroom, and ours was the Atari 800 homeroom. And so I played all the, I played everything, and so I knew games existed. And but I didn't realistically think I was going to just walk into a game company and get a job. And like they would hand me a big box of games and say, play all of these games and tell us like what's good. And I would just sit there like thinking in my head, how is this like happening? What the hell?
so wow. So you were delivering a Mac and you got a job in QA basically back in the day,
Yeah, well,
1987.
I mean, it was like a 5-person company. So I was QA, I was development, I was kind of everything. I mean, like um, the boss would send me to get his car washed, and it was like pick up dry cleaning. It was like whatever. Like I said, it was it was five. I was employee number 7.
Yeah.
So, and I worked there for about 5 years, and I worked on got to be like 50 games or something crazy.
Wow. Okay. So you were there for 5 years. Whoa, hold up. You worked on 50 games in 5 years with 7 people?
Well, the company obviously grew. Like, when I started, the company was, I don't know, like less than a year old, and they had explosive growth. Money was like, falling from the sky. And so, by the time I left, Acclaim was probably like 300 people.
Oh
So
wow. They went from 5 to 300 people in 5 years.
yeah, I mean, you can imagine back then, you, like a NES game would sell millions of units, and it was a lot of profit. So the company was doing really, really well, and they were hiring like mad. Development grew. It was, started, like I said, just me, but it grew very rapidly. But a producer at Acclaim might have 10 games that they were responsible for at one time. So, we had very competent developers that were doing the work, and mostly we were just kind of overseeing and facilitating assets and helping marketing out. So it wasn't like, when I say 10 games, it wasn't like I was slaving away,
Oh yeah.
doing
I mean, how
80 hour
many?
weeks.
How? I don't even know where to begin because it feels so different. Like how many people were on a team back then for an NES game?
I mean, maybe like three.
So it'd be like three people for like how long was a game in development?
Yeah, I mean, so keep in mind, like, the kind of work that Acclaim did was mostly like a movie or a comic license, cartoons. So usually it was very rapid development. Yeah, I would say maybe a year. So you might have one or two engineers and then a couple of artists, maybe. Some of the teams might have been like five. And then a lot of the games that we did were brought over from Japan. So they would basically have sometimes it was a finished game. And then, my job would be, translate the English, correct the English, I should say. And then sometimes there was content you had to deal with. Um, Actually, I'll give a funny example. I worked on the Rambo game,
Yeah.
and I I was playing the finished game right before we picked it up. It was already shipped in Japan, and so we translated the text, or they translated the text into English, and then we had this really really bad English. So then we went through and made corrections. But I was literally taking faxes and writing on them, and then faxing them back to them, right? Because they there was no email, so they couldn't email me the file.
Wait,
So it
this
was
is
all done with, like literally me with a pencil drawing on the paper. And it was a very text heavy game. So it was probably like, I don't know, 50 pages of dialogue. And so the game gets finished and we ship it. And like 2 weeks into it, someone calls, and I also answer the phones, talk to people who call with questions. And he starts telling me this thing like, at the end of the game, Rambo turns into a frog. And what does this mean? And I'm like, I thought it was a joke. Like, what are you talking about? So we fax the developer and say, hey, at the end of the game, does Rambo turn into a frog? Like, that seems inappropriate. And they're like, oh, yes, yes, yes. And, that represents the badness of his soul. And, if he made the wrong choices in the game. And we're just like, yeah, can you please take that out quickly? Um, and, so I think somewhere, if you Google, you can actually find a video of Rambo turning into a frog on YouTube. So yeah, so for a lot of development, back then it was Japanese in the beginning, and then slowly it switched over, and then a lot of the games were developed in the UK, or like Mortal Kombat was in Utah.
wow. This is I mean, you just blew my mind with the concept that there was no email and you were making games. Can we
There was
pause? Can we pause for 1 second? Do you have Discord open? Could because I keep
oh
hearing your Discord.
yeah, sorry about that.
If you could,
Actually, I forgot on my laptop, which I don't use. Actually, everything is open.
got it. My bad. It's
Yeah.
like it's pinging a lot.
Discord, Slack. Uh, we'll just kill Steam while we're at it. Dropbox.
This is a big change. There was a time when you had to fax things around, and now you've got to like close your 20 billion apps.
I know. I mean, um, are we live?
Yeah, we'll pick up right here.
Yeah. Not only was there no email, but we didn't have, FTP or any way to send a file. So
Shit.
when we'd send a fax to the developer and say make these changes, and we'd have to wait for them to FedEx a physical ROM to us, and then we'd put in a board and plug it into the Nintendo to play it. And then if there was something wrong, we'd have to wait. It was like a 5-day turnaround to get a new build.
Wow. I don't even know what to say. That's
Yeah.
insane. Like I think for I had to send a physical copy to Australia for ratings back like 5 years ago, and I debated just not doing it. I'm like, look, you are so far behind the times. If I have to mail you something in the mail, like who gets mail anymore? I can't imagine. Like it's actually hard for me to even imagine. You
Yeah. In fact, I haven't done an ESRB rating in a long time because I haven't done like a physical product in years. But when we would do ESRB rating, you had to make a videotape.
Mhm.
Oh no, actually, you know what I'm thinking about? Even before that, for Nintendo, when you would submit a game, there were so many content issues. Like, and honestly, I worked on a bunch of games that had a bunch of content issues, like the arcade game Narc, which was all basically every imaginable drug and vice in one game. And so Nintendo had this policy: you had to make a videotape of the entire game and send it in with your submission. And then the rule was you couldn't edit the tape because they wanted to make sure you were showing the whole game and you didn't cut out the juicy parts. And so yeah, we had to make a physical videotape and then mail it to them.
Did you have to like do it in one shot? I mean, I guess games back then you could play through in one day. It
Yeah, you
wasn't
had to do
quite.
it in one shot. So for every game, we knew was the which was the tester. Sorry, we had a little pause there. For every game, you had to know which was the tester that was really good at that game, and then that guy would like be on on the hot seat to make that tape. And sometimes, like halfway through the tape, he would die or game over, and then you'd have to start over and do the whole thing again.
Wow. That's insane. That's like I don't even know where to begin. So you spent 5 years there, and that still takes you to long before I was in the industry. Uh,
Yeah, I think I left in like 92 or something like that.
92. Okay, what happened next?
What happened was, I was kind of kind of spoiled kid, and didn't really, have a lot of great kind of business skills, and so they told me to, take off, and I just had been talking to a friend of mine who had a friend at Sony, and I had met them, and we'd kind of gotten along, and then I called up and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a job," and they said, "Oh, come out to LA, come work at Sony."
Wait, so where were
So,
you before LA? Like
well, Acclaim was New York.
New York. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I lived in Oyster Bay, Long Island, home of
Nice.
the Oyster Fest.
So how old were you when you crossed the country to go from New York to LA?
I guess I was like 23.
Yeah. I mean, that seems so normal because like I'm a millennial and we do that all the time, but that was way rarer back then, just picking up and like crossing the country.
I mean, and I think the cool thing about it was if you're going to move across the country, the right way to do it is to have a giant multinational corporation hire you and move you.
Just physically,
So
yeah, I'll
they
bet.
they showed up at my house with a truck. They packed my house, loaded everything up, and then somebody got into my RX-7 and drove it up the ramp into the truck behind my couch, and my stuff magically appeared in LA 2 weeks later.
And then you were
Uh,
working at Sony. So you went from working for a company that was kind of working for Nintendo, it sounds like, and now you're working on, at this point, it sounds like that would be the PS1 or the PS2.
that was before the launch of the PS1.
What?
So I was actually really excited that I was going to work for this new, first party to work on PlayStation 1. And then the funny thing is, I got there and they assigned me a bunch of Sega CD games. And, before the launch of PlayStation, Sony ImageSoft, which was the game team, was doing cross-platform, Sega and Nintendo games. And they kept doing that because that was like what they knew how to do. And so I got these like, crappy movie license Sega CD games, and I was like, "Hey, what about that PlayStation thing?" And they were like, "Yeah, yeah, later, later." Um, and yeah, actually, ironically, never worked on a PlayStation One game when I was at Sony.
Huh. Okay. So
So
you were mostly managing like uh you were kind of like a product lead. What would you say you did at Sony?
We call it external producer, right?
External
So
producer.
I was a producer, and I had like 4 games that I worked on with different teams. Actually, interestingly enough, the 2 of the games I worked on were with Psygnosis, which had been brought into the Sony family, and they were pretty well respected, kind of hot team at the time. They had made a bunch of like really innovative games, and they were in Liverpool, which I had heard of. Like of course everyone knows Liverpool is the birthplace of the Beatles, and so I went out there for the first time. I thought it was going to be this like beautiful, exciting place, and it's not that beautiful. I hope there's no one watching this from Liverpool.
It's decidedly okay.
Okay, yeah, it was. I mean, it was great, and they had great food and all that. But yeah, I mean, it was just I don't know. I had this weird idea in my head that like the Beatles were going to be hanging out on the corner playing music or something.
Uh,
Um, Apparently they were disbanded by that time. So
I feel like if you're from New York and then LA, you've probably I don't like if you've been to New York City, you've seen, in my opinion, one of you've seen some of the most extreme beauty. Like New York is insane. LA is beautiful in a different, weird kind of a way. Uh, Arguably, I don't
yeah, I mean,
know.
to me, those are like two of the greatest cities in the world.
Yeah,
And when I was at Acclaim, I spent a lot of time in London, and also an incredibly beautiful, I would say even better city than New York, different ways.
different. Yeah.
But and I didn't mean to disparage Liverpool, but so I worked on some really interesting games with that Psygnosis team, but it wasn't PlayStation. So I got a little jaded, and they kept changing management. And Kelly Flock joined. Kelly's a legend. He's a really a guy with an impressive career, and he really kind of, in a lot of ways, turned that place around right after I left, which was very ironic. And Kelly decided to move the that division to Northern California, to San Francisco. That's They renamed it 989 when they did that, because they moved into the building that was 989 something Avenue. And I said, no, I want to stay in LA, so I'm going to get out of here. And at the time, a really good friend of mine who was still at Acclaim had started to interview, and he was interviewing at Activision and Fox. And he said, "Oh, wherever I land, like, come work with me." And I wanted to work at Fox because that sounded really cool. So I kept telling him, "Oh, Activision, yeah, I'm not really sure about that place. I think you should go to Fox." Because of course that's where I wanted to go. So he took the job at Fox, and then like a week after he got there, they said, "Yeah, come here, work on stuff here." So and that was actually, I was sorry to leave Sony, but Fox was a really exciting move, and it was really neat to work at a movie studio.
Okay, so now, so you would before you were making a lot of games that were based on other people's IPs. You were managing and producing these games made on based on other people's IPs, and now you're there. You're with the creatives because you're at Fox, doing what did you do at Fox as a producer?
Yeah, and the funny thing is that I had worked on all the Simpsons games at Acclaim, and so I went to Fox thinking, "Oh, this is great. I'll work on all the Simpsons games." And then the first project I started working on was Die Hard Trilogy, and which was great. I love Die Hard, and the game was really fantastic. And I ended up passing all the Simpsons stuff to another producer, and so I actually ended up not working on anything Simpsons. But mostly I worked on Die Hard. I worked on Independence Day, which was a good game, and the original Alien versus Predator.
Yeah. We're finally, this is really embarrassing because we're finally catching up to the games that I remember from my youth now.
Okay,
So I'm like, okay, we're there. All right, the Simpsons games. Yeah, I remember these. Yes. Wow, this is insane. Okay, so you were there for those, and your job was mostly producing at this point. Were you like,
yeah,
can you explain
yeah.
what it was to be a producer back then on those games? Like,
Well,
what is your
and
day to day?
just to make like a small distinction, right? Like, there really people don't understand there really are two kinds of producers in the industry, and so Acclaim, Sony, Fox, I was an external producer. So an external producer is three jobs. One is oversight over the developer, right? Making sure they actually deliver something that is good. And then a second job is supporting the developer. So developer needs assets or they need, like for example, during Die Hard, they would say, okay, we need reference photos for Die Hard 1. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm sitting in the building. And I just picked up a camera and just started taking pictures of the building. I walked around and took pictures of like elevators and things. Um, and the third job is supporting the internal team. So which means sales and marketing.
Hmm.
So take screenshots, helping get the manual developed. Back then we had manuals.
Yeah.
Uh,
Were you in charge, like producers today, when I think of an external producer, a lot of it's managing QA. Um, a lot of times they're kind of the bad guy. If you're a developer, they're kind of the ones that are telling you have to change things because your game won't sell very well, or you have to, they're the ones telling you that you haven't met your milestone or you have met your milestone. Like they're kind of like the law in a way. I,
yeah,
is that how you kind of see it, or?
yeah, totally, 100%. And actually, to put it into a little bit of perspective, like you're someone who you develop your game.
Mhm.
And so your publisher is not going to force you to make changes you don't want to make, or they might try. But at that point in my life, again, Acclaim, Sony, Fox, those were all work for hire projects where it was
Mhm.
our IP or it was our idea. And so the developers really were kind of in a way like subservient to us.
Yeah.
So that what you just described was totally my job. Was if the developer delivered something I didn't like, I would say, let's do this a different way. And
Well, you're paying for it. Like that's the
you're
difference.
paying
If
for
you
it,
want
right?
to, yeah, like the risk of it's great that I don't have to sorry, deal with somebody telling me what to do, but I pay for that in that I have to pay for it, right? And the way I think of it is if you're a publisher and you're completely paying for a project for a developer to do, they of course they work for you. That's like the point, right? It kind of makes sense. It's work for hire. Um,
Yeah,
anyway.
totally. And I think I probably played that card a few too many times. I mean, there's times where I absolutely had to play that card, and because it was our movie or or our property.
And people
But
are like, I understand people getting very draconian about their IP. A lot of places have, like Disney is famous for being very difficult to work with. If you make a game for Disney, you'll pitch a game, and then they'll be like, "Oh, you're making a Disney princess game. The player character can't die. We can't have a princess die." You're like, "But it's a game, and we pitched it." Like, yeah, but princesses don't die. Can she get sick? No. Can she faint? Maybe. Like, and it's on the one hand, if, as a game developer, you're like, this is fucking awful. What are we doing? On the other hand, like, there's people,
yeah,
like there's an established group of people that are keeping the Disney princesses a very specific thing across all media, and they are paying you to make this game, and you kind of have to. It's
for
not
sure.
necessarily a fun job, but you gotta like respect that, you know.
And the thing is, the thing that a lot of people don't understand is the brand itself is so much bigger than the Disney Princess PlayStation 2 game. And so, one princess is worth billions of dollars to Disney, and they would rather not do the game than have anything that could damage the brand. And Barbie is the same way. I had friends that worked on Barbie games, and Barbie is not allowed to bend over.
Yeah.
There's all these because it's funny. I mean, I'm like trying not to laugh, but like even the thought that Barbie could be physically in a position where like if the two characters came together and someone took a screenshot and it looked inappropriate, and that Disney is just not interested in having that happen.
I've heard
So
so many stories with this kind of stuff. Like I remember on The Sims, the one laptop that can't break is the Intel laptop, or like everything in The Sims can break except for that. Or I
I
don't
believe that because if Intel, did some
Intel
kind of
paid.
deal, right? I'm trying to think if we ever, like on Die Hard, there was nothing like that. Like Die Hard, there's no producer that owns Die Hard, so we could basically do anything we wanted.
Mhm.
The only funny thing is, one time there was a lawyer for our group. She was like a really powerful lawyer, and she walked by my office and she said, "Oh, I heard you're doing voice recording, tomorrow." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, we've got this great cast. We've got a guy that sounds just like Bruce Willis." And she was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bruce has like most actors, he has a clause in his contract that you can't do sound alikes." And she's like, "You got to make sure it doesn't sound like Bruce Willis." And that was probably the only kind of constraint that the brand ever brought to us. So I called up, there's Lonnie Minnelli is a famous voice director and does like a lot of games. And I said, "Look, Lonnie, you can't let this guy sound like Bruce Willis." She's like, "Sure, no problem, no problem." And it comes back, a couple of days later. And, so Lonnie was so good that I didn't even go to the recording. I just gave her the script, and it was all just like kind of dialogue that the characters shout, like when they're being chased and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And of course, it sounds just like him, right? It's like a perfect Bruce Willis. And I'm just, so we just stuck it in, and we never, we're like, don't anybody let Jamie play this game because we'll all get in trouble. And people still, like 10 years later, would come up to me and go, "Oh, how did you get Bruce Willis in that game?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's not Bruce Willis.
It's like
Doesn't sound like him."
we just don't talk about it. We just
And then
hope we.
25 years later, um, someone called me like, "Hey, can you help this person out with this project?" And it was this woman who had an idea for a game about women and their careers. And I went to her house to meet her, and her husband was the actor from Die Hard, who was the reporter, is kind of like the jerk reporter that I think Bruce Willis punches
Yeah,
him at the end or something.
yeah.
And I was like, "Oh wow." It was just very funny. Die
I
Hard.
watch that movie every year for Christmas. I've,
As you should. It's the greatest Christmas movie ever.
of course, of all time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's funny. That's such a good
But
story.
Die Hard and Bad Santa.
But what about? Oh, you watch that one every year for Christmas?
Those are the two best Christmas movies.
Got it. All right.
Yeah.
I have never watched Bad Santa. I must catch up on that. I'm
Oh,
trying to think. I don't. The only time I worked on an IP that was somebody else's was Marvel Heroes. And working with Marvel, I think we were lucky. I mean, it was a pain in the ass working with somebody else's IP. There was every time we made any character model, we had to go send it to Marvel, and they had to approve it and so forth. And they definitely had certain skins that they wanted in the game and other things. But it was kind of, in a way, it was kind of cool because we got Brian Michael Bendis is like this famous writer, and his whole thing was making sure his whole job is to make sure all the comics and all the movies and all the games and everything is rowing in one direction, right? And he came and like we had to pay him, but he came and wrote like the because we had that guy writing the script for our game, like it was untouchable because
oh,
it was
great.
like the top of the chain had already approved it because the top of the chain was the one that wrote it, and so we were kind of like safe as far as the story goes. They Marvel cares about their story. That's
Yeah, I worked on a Spider-Man NES game. No, no, sorry, Game Boy. And Marvel came back and said Spider-Man's not red enough.
all right. Did you
It
make
was
him redder?
so I gotta help the punchline along. This is the original Game Boy that was only black and white.
Oh,
So
right. Well, what
that's one of my like four crazy licensor stories. You only get one per interview.
okay. That one's difficult. That's a difficult challenge. How'd you
Uh,
facilitate
I think
making him redder?
we had to explain it to them. I think we had to say, look, there's black, there's white, there's light gray and dark gray, and we were using light gray, and that's kind of all you get.
Fair enough, man. That's
Yeah.
crazy. God, so was that it? Were you at Fox when you were working at Spider-Man? Because I know Fox
I
is
know that was actually at Acclaim. At Acclaim, we did
okay.
a lot of Spider-Man and X-Men, and this is like before the movies. But I think we did a Wolverine game,
Mhm.
so it was great stuff to work on. And again, we had like a bunch of really great developers that we worked with. Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah,
so you were
Fox really only did three games, really. I mean, I helped out on the Simpsons stuff a little bit, and we did this thing called Simpsons Cartoon Studio, which was like a million frames of animation, and you could had every Simpsons character, and you could basically make little cartoons. Um, I didn't actually work on that, but it was awesome app. And you like sadly, I don't think you can get it or play it. Like it's Director and it runs on Windows 3, and but it was really fun. And so that was when you were talking about like the Disney princesses, and
Yeah.
it just reminded me of Simpsons Cartoon Studio because we had one guy in the office who could take every animation, like he was somehow able to put these things together into like the most inappropriate cartoons ever. Um, and I'm sad that it doesn't exist anymore. Like I had a floppy somewhere that had the save files, but it was exactly what Disney doesn't want you to do with their princesses. He was able to do with the Simpsons.
Interesting. So did you? You're not gonna give me any other stories where you got in trouble using people's IP?
Um,
That seems fair.
my other favorite was Terminator 2.
Yeah.
There's a very classic shot of Linda Hamilton where she's got her hair in a ponytail, she's wearing a wife beater, and she's got the M16 in her hand. And it's a classic picture. You could Google and find that picture really easily. And we used that picture for one of the story screens. And again, this is Game Boy, so it was digitized down to like 100 by 100 or something like that. And Jim Cameron saw it, and they launched into this you know critical tirade about how we made Linda Hamilton look like a whore.
What?
And I don't remember if her boobs were too big or if they were too if the shirt was too revealing or something, and we had to go in and edit her her boobs to make them less whorish. And we went back and forth, I think, 5 times. um, I don't know if they were dating at the time. That may have had something to do with it. But yeah, I mean, the funny thing was we just had digitized this stock photo that was one of the stock photos that was used everywhere. And
Yeah.
literally, I had this fax from Jim Cameron's office that said, in this picture, she looks like a whore.
Oh my god. I was about to say, well, don't let him Google it, and then he'll find out it's everywhere. But then then you said the word fax, and I realized we are still pre-internet.
Yeah, there was no
Holy
Google. Yeah,
shit.
yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, we had I'm trying to think of a situation like that. We definitely had a thing at Marvel. A Marvel everybody wears spandex, and there was a conversation about like the package size of the various superheroes relative to each other internally. We had a lot of jokes about things like that. Uh and that was definitely something there you have conversations with people who own the IPs with where like you kind of talk around it and figure out what you're supposed to do because it's you can't really ask directly. Oh God, the industry's
I,
such a
I've,
weird
I've
place.
luckily never had package conversations with anyone. Thank God.
Well, I mean, they all wear spandex, both Black Panther and Captain America. Like everybody wears spandex in that thing. Anyway, we should move off of that. So where I don't even know where to go from here. You.
I went to Activision.
Oh, but you didn't want to go to Activision. Why did you thought
Well, that was
Activision was super
yeah, I forgot
uncool?
about that. That was ironic. They had been calling me. I think it was after Die Hard shipped. I think literally, I think someone went through the credits and they just cold called me and said, "Can you come over and talk to us?" And actually, I think I had been at Fox for about 3 years, and I was a little disillusioned by the lack of leadership. They had kind of a home video guy running the game group, and their marketing was really poor, and the distribution was not great. So Die Hard, as an example, sold 2.5 million units in Europe, and like 150,000 in the U.S. And Europe was EA. So
Wait,
I saw.
explain this to me. So Fox. So when you were at Fox, your job was to get a bunch of game developers to make the game, and then if Fox somebody you knew there would distribute it in America, but somebody EA distributed it in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, fairly simple. Like the leadership of the interactive group, which was we were like a subsidiary of the entertainment, the movie studio, basically.
Okay.
They had a sales team and they had a marketing team, And so they were using their home video sales team to sell the products because the theory was, home videos go to stores that also carry games.
Uh-huh.
And so they, that was their business. But for Europe, since they didn't have an organization in Europe, we just did a, publishing deal with EA for EA to distribute the products in the rest of the world. I guess it was Europe and Asia. Because I remember Die Hard, we did actually localize into Japanese. I have a copy of that somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's
and,
awkward. So you had
but
a publisher publishing it overseas and they did better than you.
yeah, and honestly, I think that's not uncommon. I mean, and honestly, again, like it was EA, and EA was this, pretty big established publisher, so they knew how to ship games. They were very good at that. And but when I saw that, I felt like, this I don't want to make games that aren't going to sell well.
Mhm.
And well, I mean, clearly at Acclaim, I had made some games that were kind of stinkers, but Die Hard was a 95%, Metacritic game, and if that game was not going to sell well in the U.S., that didn't make me feel good.
Did did
And
Metacritic exist before the internet?
no, well, there was internet at that time,
Oh,
so
okay.
hold
Well,
on
the
there.
okay, sorry.
Yeah,
You said
there were.
fax. The fact that you're still using faxes is still blowing my mind. I'm like
At,
imagining the corrugated paper and shit. Like I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so yeah, at Fox we had email even.
Okay.
Um,
All right,
but it was
warped
one of
email.
those things where we had to get like corporate permission for them to turn on email outside the company. And so we did have that. And we what was I talking about? The
Oh. I'm gonna say stuff like that never changes. I've been talking to people
no,
about who are working from home right now, but aren't allowed to have their perforce can't sync their perforce to their local to their home machine because nobody wants the build to get out. Like corporations are
yeah,
gonna be draconian throughout history.
yeah, and there's that's the difference between a team. Like the teams I've built have usually been a lot of remote people, so usually we have that stuff like source control in the cloud and things like that. So we're used to that, but certainly there's a lot of teams that aren't used to that, and they're dealing with VPNs, or a lot of people I know are remoting into their machine that's still sitting on their desk that no one's sitting at.
Yeah, I
Um,
the problem there is somebody's got to go kick that and turn it on. If like I've never
yeah,
VPN at some point it always breaks down for me. I'd rather just be able to sync it per force server, but we're jumping to now and we're
yeah, yeah,
skipping like
sure, sure.
15 years.
Well,
So
let's catch up a little.
okay,
So I did go to, Activision recruited me, and I went there and I talked to them, and I think there was something in my head that clicked, and I thought it would be really exciting to work on a dev team
Mhm.
versus being an external producer. And the Fox thing, like I said, I was a little disillusioned, and so I remember sitting in a hotel room at E3, like sitting on the bed, which now seems slightly inappropriate, with what was his name? With
That's
Howard
most
Moore.
GDC meetings I have. Honestly,
Yeah,
as an indie, everything wraps right back around. Like I meet the humble team in a suite in a hotel. Like it's
yeah.
still like
This
that.
was just like a small room with one bed, but that wasn't
Yeah,
the point
that's
of
a
the
little
story
weird.
anyway. I mean, I got out okay, and they offered me to work on a game which became eventually became Battlezone. And I will say that, when I said before there's two different kinds of producers, I had really been this other thing. They should have two different names because they really are different jobs.
Well,
And so I
yeah.
wasn't very good at it. And I it took me a few months to realize that I didn't know what I was doing and I wasn't very good at it, because I went from managing a business relationship with another company to managing a team of people, and in theory telling people what to do to make a game. And I didn't know, someone needed to tell me how to do it, right? Because I had spent years just yelling at people to make it more blue, or to make Linda Hamilton look less like a whore, um, make Spider-Man more red. And in spite of my attempts to or my lack of ability, the game actually ended up great. It was a fantastic team. It's probably one of the best games I've ever worked on, and it had, I think also like 95 Metacritic. Oh, you said, did Metacritic exist? That's where we got lost.
Yeah.
When I say Metacritic, like there was no Metacritic back then, but we
There
kept
was
track of the
some
reviews,
sort
and
of
the reviews
thing.
were all in the
So
90s.
before you went to work on a dev team, did you have any experience managing people at all? Um,
No,
okay.
no, I mean, other than a couple of APs or QA people.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, that's still managing. Like, did they report to you and you told them what to do?
yeah, but I certainly wouldn't claim to have any management skills.
I
You
see.
know, I think I was someone that probably needed to take a management class, because it really was not something that I'd ever. I mean, again, like I was an 18-year-old kid that just kind of got thrown into the pool, and somehow I didn't drown, and I just kind of kept swimming.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
you
think
were.
that's the story of my career. And I say to people out there that are watching this, I think there's probably 3 people watching this, but uh, like I don't let the fact that you don't know how to do something stop you from doing it, because at the end you'll probably know what you're doing. Maybe not
Yeah.
at the beginning, but it's
Besides,
like,
you'll end up only doing things that have been done before if all you do is wait for somebody to tell you how to do a thing.
yeah, exactly.
That's not how you got where you are, clearly.
Yeah,
So okay. So then now you're at Activision. How long were you at Activision?
I think that game, that was about a year and a half.
Okay.
And when
Was
I
that the
got
entire?
there,
Were you there from the entire dev cycle? Was a year and a half?
yeah, so when I got there, they had a prototype running,
Okay.
and they called that development at Activision. And then at some point, when you felt like you had the game, you had locked into what the game was, then you'd go into production. And production was probably about 10 months. And so production was when we built the actual content of the game.
Wow.
And
I
uh,
strongly believe with this philosophy. Actually, that seems right to me.
yeah, it's a great way to do it. And of course, because it was an internal team, it wasn't like they were rushing to finish the game, because they were going to run out of money or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, so I was there, and what was interesting was when I got there, there were 11 dev teams, and so there was like the I-76 team, there was an RTS team doing Dark Reign, there was a Civilization team, there were a bunch of smaller teams, there was some Zork team, and when I left, that was when Activision decided they wanted to downsize, and they wanted a lot of the dev teams to go external, and so like the Battlezone team became Pandemic, and the Dark Reign team and the Heavy Gear team became Savage, and so they were actually encouraging those teams to spin out, and continue to work for Activision as independents. And at the same time, I started talking to Crave, who were licensing Battlezone for N64. So now we're in the N64 era, and that was more of an external producer job. And I was kind of like, I don't really know, this internal development. I'm not really very good at it, so I'm going to go back to what I know how to do. And so I went to Crave, and I was probably at Crave for 3 or 4 years, as an executive producer, where I managed most. At some point, towards the end, they split. They had 2 executive producers, but I managed most of the development at Crave. So a lot of Dreamcast games, a lot of PlayStation One, PlayStation Two. Um, Trying to think what the other Game Boy. Um, was there another? Wait, Sony, Nintendo. Oh, and the original Xbox.
Yeah.
We did a couple.
Wow. Cool.
Wow. So again, it was a lot like Acclaim, like a lot of games were like pushing through stuff with multiple SKUs, and
Uh,
uh, lots and lots of volume, a lot of stuff from Japan,
yeah.
uh, and a lot of licensed stuff.
And this is back to you're mostly managing logistics, working with developers and IP holders, making sure
Yeah.
everything gets QA'd, passing cert. What was cert like back then?
Um, yeah. Let's see. So Sony was the hardest, I think. And Nintendo, like, there was no TCR book. There would just be like a couple of memos, and then they would make stuff up. Right. So you'd get rejected,
Huh.
and they would say, well, you got rejected for this thing. We haven't released it yet, but it breaks on your game. So can you fix these things?
Mm.
And it was like random and unexpected. Sony, at least, they would say, "Oh, you violated TCR 54.7 if the player removes all four controllers at the same time while sticking their tongue out. One white pixel appeared on the top left of the screen."
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
Sony remains. I mean, they're not that bad. The big irritation with me for Sony is you have to have a static IP, which is very difficult if you're an independent developer. Like I
yeah,
basically had to get like a what do you call it? Like I forget what it's called, like a virtual host to like.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Well,
a pain
some
in the
what some
ass.
people do is you get a free Amazon, like an AWS server, and point everything through that.
Yeah,
There's
it's
tricks.
it's tricks. Yeah, it's weird the hoops you have to jump through for Sony
Even
still.
even back then, like again, like PlayStation 1, everything was you had to burn discs and mail them to Sony. But I think even for the development forums, you did have to have a static IP back then. So they've had that for a long time.
Wait, so every time you went into cert, like how long did it take to go through cert back then? Like if you failed cert, you'd have to mail them another physical disc.
Yeah, I think it was like you'd wait in a queue, and then the actual cert itself would be like 3 days or something like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the submission package, you'd build the submission package for, take like 3 days to build the package because you had, the manual and you had the videotapes of the game. And so someone would build those ahead of time. And then you had to burn 8 discs.
Okay, when you said build the package, I meant like, wow, the compile times were that long back then. But you
Yeah.
mean no, somebody had to play the game and
Yeah.
record the
I mean,
entire
there was a big FedEx box that you'd start
the
filling with
physical
stuff.
package.
There
All
was a
right.
checklist. We'd go through the checklist, and the you had to burn 8 discs. It took 2 hours each to burn the discs. They were CDs. Now later there was one company that made an approved, because the burner you were using was this $6,000 Sony burner that was only for PlayStation games. It was like this really high end CD burner, and somebody got approved to make a 5 disc tower that could burn five at once, and it was like the greatest thing ever invented. We were so excited when this thing came out, and actually I think it cost $10,000 for the
Yeah.
tower.
Yeah,
And
my brother and I bought a $20 thing that would let you put like copied DVDs into the
right,
PS1.
right, yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
Um, so, so you had to burn 8 discs, and you were required to verify 3 of them, which meant you had to put them back in one at a time and tell the burner to read it and verify it. It had like a verify mode, and then you marked those 3 discs with a V. And I will tell you that after the first game that I submitted, we just would randomly take 3 discs and write a V on them. Um, so, but yeah, you had to put all that into a FedEx and send it to Sony, and then they would acknowledge. The next day they'd acknowledge they got it, and then you wait on a line, and then eventually somebody would play the game for like 3 days and come back with all your cert problems. And I will say one time for Independence Day, I got on a plane from LA, and I took a taxi to Sony, and I hand delivered the package because we didn't want to lose the day because it was like too late for FedEx.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, I've heard story like get it, throw it in your car and drive from Boston to New York kind of stories, but that's a new one for me. You
well,
did
it was only an hour flight, so it was actually really easy to do.
an hour flight to get from LA to Japan?
No, no, to San Francisco.
Oh, Sony San Francisco. Got it. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so for Sony, America would approve your game, and then
Got it.
and that was good. Now for Nintendo, you would always send your ROMs to NOA in Seattle. They would approve it, and then they would send the ROMs after they approved it. They'd send it to Japan to NCL, and they would basically start over the whole process.
Hmm.
And so many times, Nintendo of America would approve your game, and Japan would come back and they would be like, "Oh, on NES variant 22, if you hit reset 5 times, the game crashes, and you'd have to fix it."
Yeah. I mean, there's still, yeah. Releasing in multiple regions is still kind of difficult because there's still Sony Europe and Sony America, and I'm not out in Japan. I'm not out in. I think the only way to play kind in Japan or in China is on the Xbox because they're the only one that's global. Like you can launch and it's on everything.
Okay.
Whereas I don't have your skills for dealing with bullshit and bureaucracy. Like I just couldn't. I looked at what it would take to come out in like Japan and China for on the PS4 and on the Switch, and I was just like, I'm busy. Like I had to write off those regions. Just between like for one thing, if you don't it this is a total aside, but like if you don't have the ability to market in those countries, it almost doesn't matter anyways. You're just gonna get
Yeah.
buried. So
Well, I think that's the answer to that is probably a local partner.
yeah.
You know, find a team in Japan that is good, and work with them.
Yeah, I gotta find the Japanese Mike Arkin. Okay, so
Uh, but Mike Arkin's on.
it's what?
My wife will translate for you. My wife is Japanese and she translates professionally. So
Oh, nice. All right, we'll talk about that later.
sure.
So now you're okay. I think so now you're at Crave. Is where we are in the
Yeah,
story.
so I was at Crave. We did a bunch of stuff at Crave. We had a lot of fun. Eventually, they ran out of money, and I was talking to a buddy of mine who, was the guy that invented the Power Glove, and he just like I just had lunch with him. I had lunch with everybody, right? I was like, I'm looking for work. I had lunch with everybody, and he said, "We're making this game for Fox, and we need a little help. Can you come and help us out?" And it was Alien versus Predator, the RTS, which was really funny because I would, when I was at Fox, we'd sit at lunch and say, "Oh, we should make an RTS out of it, AVP one day." And I went in and talked to them, and they said, "Look, like we're good with this game, but we need our next game. Like, what are we going to do next?" And I said, "Look, I've signed lots of deals with developers. So I'll just be the developer. It's the same thing. It'll be so easy. How hard could it be to go and find people to give us money to make games?" Um, so, the punchline is it's actually really hard.
Wait, so
And
you went from this time you tried to be. I'm confused. You tried to spin up a new studio. So now you went from being a publishing producer to being an in house executive producer on a game title on a property, and you were pitching that property around because you kind of
well,
like jumped to the other side of the fence.
yeah, these guys, the company was called Zono. They had been around for 10 years.
Okay.
And basically, the two, there was a creative guy and a technical guy, and they didn't have a producer or a business guy. And so I said, I'll be your biz dev guy and I'll find the next project for you. And I spent a couple of months pitching. They had some great tech. They had some, really interesting ideas. It was a tough sell because they were a really small studio at a time when studios were getting bigger,
Mhm.
and their game that they could show people was a real-time strategy game, which was really neat. But a lot of people were saying, "Hey, I wonder if RTS on a console like works. So why don't you ship that? And when it's a big hit, call us back, and then we'd love to work with you."
Mm.
And we were like, "Okay, cool, but between ship that and it's a big hit, we're going to need like another project." So um, it was tough. And like I said, because they were a small studio at a time when people were looking for bigger studios, and we were 20, and people were looking for 40
Mm.
and 50. This is like PlayStation 2, and things were they were ramping up and getting bigger. And one day I ended up in a hotel room with a producer from Activision Minnesota, which was their budget group, and they were like, "Hey, could you make an RTS, yeah, for like $150,000?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure," because I had, my philosophy was to say yes to everything, even if it was impossible. Um, you can always figure it out later. And I went back and I told the team, "Hey, these guys want us to make an RTS. We'll need like 2 months to do it. Can you guys pull that off?" And they were like, "No fucking way. Like, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, okay, like what will take a long time?" They were like, "Well, building the units, building the missions, building the environments." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, those are a lot of things." And so I said, like, "Okay, well, what if you only had 3 units per side? Like a ranged, a melee, and like a healer." And they were like, "Oh yeah, actually that would kind of work. Yeah, we could totally do that." And I was like, "Okay, what if there was only one environment for the whole game and you just built different missions on that environment?" And they were like, "That really sounds stupid, but okay, sure." And we made that game in 2 months. It's called The Crusades, and We recorded the audio in someone's garage. The knight. There's a knight who's basically, it's like a. In some ways, I think the audio is a Monty Python parody. And he, like, one guy put a helmet on his head and recorded all the audio through an aluminum helmet, and it's almost fun.
It was a game jam. You basically made a
Um,
game jam for Sony.
yeah, exactly. I mean, like, when you look at it, the art looks great. For a game from 2002. It looks fantastic. And then Activision came back and said, can you make 3 more games? And so we did an Everest game, which was the same. This is all the same engine, right? We had this real-time strategy engine from AVP. So we made an Everest game where your real-time strategy is you're clicking to climb up the mountain. And somewhere in there, we made The Alamo, which was a really bad movie with Billy Bob Thornton. And so, like, with each game, we would add a couple of features. So in The Alamo, you had, during the daytime, you would build your the fort, and then at night the bad guys would come and you do your combat. So it was kind of like Rampart, where you had this, like, building fighting cycle, and it was kind of neat, actually. And then the last game that we did, the piece de resistance, was the Troy. There was a Brad Pitt movie, Troy. And by the way, none of these things were actually licensed from the movies. So the Brad Pitt movie was Troy. So they said, "Can you make a Trojan War game that doesn't feature Brad Pitt?" And on the box, the game is called The Battle for Troy, and the Battle for is in really small type, and then Troy is, like, gigantic.
Oh, barely legal again. Beautiful.
Totally, totally. And but it was fun because, like I said, with each game we were evolving. Like, we'd add a couple of features with each game,
And
and
how
so
long was the first game? Was only 2 months. How long were all the others?
I think, like, Troy, they gave us like 175, so it ended up being like 3 months. And I mean, this was really like survival work for the studio. I
Yeah.
used to joke, either we take this budget stuff or we sell crack. So, and we didn't know where to buy crack, so that wasn't going to happen. A bunch of game geeks. Um, and but it kept us afloat, for 2 years or something. And in the middle of that, like, we started talking to Atari, and Atari offered us a D&D, and they had the D&D license, and we had this amazing pitch for this turn-based D&D game that was kind of a rip-off of Advance Wars with D&D characters, and it got greenlit like 4 times. They kept calling us and saying it got greenlit. We're like, "You told us it was greenlit last week." And it kept getting greenlit, and finally, the 5th time, it didn't get greenlit, and they were like, "Oh, we're not doing any more D&D games." So, but then that led to, like, the consolation prize was Xbox and PC versions of Demon's Stone, which was this great D&D game, actually, developed by Stormfront. And anyway, so like I said, that we did a lot of small stuff. We did a lot of, like, kind of less, sophisticated projects, but it kept us alive. And then, after a few years, we got bought by MumboJumbo, which was a big casual game company. And so it was really interesting because we were doing these 2-month projects, and then casual games were small, kind of the precursor to today's, like, small mobile games. And so, we had the right team that was kind of geared towards that kind of development.
Yeah, because now let's see. Are we in the late 90s at this point? Or
We're in, well, the Mumbo Jumbo acquisition was 2006.
oh, wow. Oh, you were there a while. Did
Yeah,
I
so I
start
think
at
Dona
this?
was like 6 years total.
Got it.
And the funny thing is, I came on as a consultant, and about 2 years into it, I ended up owning the whole company. Uh, the other two, the other two founders, when we were in, like, tough financial times, they were like, "I don't want to take the financial risk," and they left. And I
Mhm.
was single and didn't own anything, so I was, like, happy to borrow from the bank to make payroll, because I didn't care. Like, I was like, "What are they? There's nothing. I have no assets,
Yeah.
so whatever." Because I was still young, and so yeah. So by the end, like, I owned the whole company, And
Oh, so that's you actually owned a company and then sold it to another company.
yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
fuck.
people do
Cool.
that.
Yeah, I know logically people do that, but that's awesome. Cool.
So we became MumboJumbo LA, and we basically made console versions of MumboJumbo um, casual games for about 2 years, and we did some great games. We did PlayStation versions of Luxor and Seven Wonders, and I think we even did. We had a board of Bejeweled, and then when it like the day it was finished, they decided not to make the deal with PopCap, and so ended up not never shipping, which was really sad.
It's
Um,
always the worst.
we had like three of those actually. It was crazy.
It's so demotivating. The worst thing is like then you go to start the next project and you can't like get passionate about it because you're like, oh, is this one going to happen or is this just going to be shipped to? Something worse than working on something when you're not sure if it's ever going to see the light of day. It's just
Yeah, we had one game where one executive used to keep coming and telling us, "You have to get this done for Christmas. This is the game that's gonna save the company," and and then they canceled it after we did
mm.
3/4 of the project and killed
But you
ourselves.
were you were on the other side of that originally. You were the one that was canceling projects to keep the company afloat. So you actually kind of understood it.
Well, I always said that when I went to Zono and for the first time I had to send invoices for milestones, and I had to sit and wait for the money to come and watch my bank account dwindle. And I finally understood everything I should have understood when I was a publishing producer.
Yeah.
And I will say that I called every single developer that I'd ever worked with and apologized. And I called up teams that I had worked with years ago, and I just said, hey, I now understand why you were so desperate to get your milestones approved, and I feel awful. I think every publishing producer should have to run a small development team for a couple of years to see what it's like to have to manage your cash flow. People don't realize that as a small developer doing work for hire, every milestone that comes in is making last month's payroll.
Yeah. And if you don't, you have this fear that you're going to have to look your employees in the eye and tell them that you can't pay them that month and you can never let anyone know how close you get to that line because you get to that line every now and then and you borrow money. It's scary business.
And I would have guys come to me all the time and say, "Can you tell us what's happening? Tell us what happened to that deal we were talking about, or what about this?" They wanted full transparency, and I wanted to be a transparent, CEO. But on the other hand, there's just it's my job to worry about that. I don't want the whole team worried about if we're not going to close a deal or if we're not going to get paid a milestone. And I'd rather have people just worry about what they need to worry about. It's really hard.
Yeah. I mean, now you've owned Big Boat Interactive for 10 years. We haven't even gotten to that yet. Is that the next step in this journey here?
Yeah, I mean, so there was when Mumbo Jumbo folded, a bunch of the Mumbo Jumbo people went, and I basically talked to some buddies of mine that needed a game team, and so we just moved over to another office and became their team, and that game never shipped. It was a driving game using Unity 1.0 because their investors wanted a web game. So I'll kind of skip over that, but it was a lot of the same team. And when that ended, they ran out of money when the financial crisis hit. So
Uh,
when that ended, three of us were like, "Hey, let's go start another thing." Like, because it all ended one day. Like one day it was all gone, and we were like, "What should we do?" And we were starting this other thing, and that was Big Boat, right? So, there was never an office. It was always just in my living room, and we spent a lot of time looking for work for hire, and we'd done some mobile. We had done like some of the first iPhone games,
so you
and
founded Big Boat. Would that be 2009, right after the financial crisis?
I think so, like 2008, yeah, sometime around then.
That was when, yeah, and that was when mobile. So this is where I'm in the industry now, and mobile is exploding, and it's all about Facebook games, mobile.
Yeah, Facebook was so we were trying to do Facebook games, and the irony is when we started Big Boat, I had a friend of mine who was my best friend's boyfriend, and he lived in my building, and trying to think, they had gotten divorced, but I went to him and said, "Hey, we're going to leave and start this game company. Do you want to get involved?" Right? We were pitching him a game that we knew he wanted to make, and he said, "I don't want to make that game. I want to start a company with you guys." So we spent 6 months negotiating to start this new company, and our focus was going to be Facebook and mobile social games before like social games existed. At that time, there was just Mafia Wars, and
Mm.
this was before Cityville and Farmville and all that stuff. And it was just we had 3 pitches for games we were going to make, and we would have ended up being like the next Scopely, or not the next, like 10 years before Scopely. And at the last minute, he pulled out. He was like, "Oh, I don't want to invest my money. Like, I changed my mind." And then we all went and got jobs, right? And it was like, okay, never mind. Um,
Finding the people you collaborate with is so hard. Like, it's finding the employees that you want to hire, getting creative, impressive people to work with you in general is always like the hardest part of anything.
yeah, and for that team, we had like 5 guys that were amazing,
Yeah.
right? It was like the best 5 guys from the MumboJumbo team, and it was just the investor guy kind of pulled out at the last minute and kind of left us hanging. So the other 2 partners went and got jobs, and I just was like, I don't want to get a job. I'm just sitting in my living room, like I'm just going to keep looking for work. And so I ended up doing some contract work, and I ended up with like 5 contractors working for me, doing like mobile prototypes. And
So wait,
uh,
when you said you got contract work, you mean you got contract work helping doing what exactly?
well, both development, right? Like I had a toy company I was working with that would come to me every 2 months with a small project they wanted knocked out on mobile. And this is now when Unity has become viable at this point. This is like Unity 3.0 or something like that.
Okay.
So I would hire contractors, mostly from this private game community that I'm a member of. And I had 2 or 3 guys that I worked with consistently. One was in Australia, one was in New Zealand. Um, and I built the company around just this loose network of contractors that I was using to make these little projects. And it was, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was working from home, and I had a baby, and it was kind of neat to be home all the time and not have to like go to work.
Makes it harder to work though with the
A
baby.
lot, I mean, a lot harder, but I made it work.
Yeah.
So, and in the middle of that, like I went to go work for a friend of mine who lived, or his office was like a half a mile away from my house, and I was doing some production for him, like while I was doing my own stuff, and I did that for about a year. And I
It's as you're saying this, you are the least risk averse person I know at this point. Like, because you've been pitching it like, well, I mean, I just risked it all because I was young and I had nothing. And now you're like, yeah, well, I mean, I had a baby, so working from home and not having a job seemed like the right thing to do. It's like, what the hell, man? How are you?
I,
like,
I had a little money in the bank, I guess. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I consciously decided not to have a job. I interviewed for a couple of jobs here and there, and
yeah.
it's just I think I was in a funny spot though, because I was an executive producer at Crave, or I was studio head at Zono Mumbo Jumbo, and so it was hard for me like to take a vanilla producer job maybe at half the salary,
Hmm.
even though I wasn't making double the salary. But it was hard for me to commit to not doing some of these other things that I had my fingers in.
Yeah.
And some of the work I was doing was very lucrative in very short spurts.
Yeah.
Um, I mean,
It's boomer
it
bust.
all,
It's yeah, that's what contracting is. Like you have one good contract and you panic. So you're like, oh my god, I may never have something like that again. And if
right.
anytime, usually you have like 4 to choose from, and then there's nothing for a year. It's really stressful.
Yeah. And in the middle of all that, I did this expert witness job. THQ and Jack's Pacific were suing each other over wrestling games, and I'd worked on all the wrestling games at Acclaim.
Oh my
And
god, we should have done the entire podcast about this. So you were
yeah,
an expert witness in a trial.
it was. So THQ and Jack's Pacific had a joint venture where Jack's had the license for wrestling, and THQ made all the video games. Jack's made all the toys, and THQ decided to do a UFC game, and so Jax decided that that should have fallen under the joint venture. I had worked as the producer on the original UFC game, which was Dreamcast, and I'd been the producer at Acclaim on all the WWF games. This is back when it was called WWF. And my boss at Skyworks, which was the thing after MumboJumbo, was an expert witness, and he said, "Hey, can you help out with this expert witness thing?" And they interviewed me, and they said, "Yeah, actually, you're perfect for this." And so I ended up being the testifying expert in the trial. But the only reason why I brought that story up was that they pay you an extraordinary amount of money for expert witness work,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like
It's a bribe.
$500 an hour basically, and they pay for the research, and so I spent months doing research for that. Like I was preparing videos of the two games side by side and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun, and I worked with some amazing lawyers who taught me a lot about testifying, and they taught me how to prepare, which was kind of neat.
You,
And
you are a fascinating person. Like, this was really fun. I got to get really involved with bureaucracy. There was this terrible controversy, and they were paying me well. I was like,
well,
all right, I'm gonna.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it like that. I mean, you've got an interesting spin. The way I looked at it was, I'm an argumentative person,
Yeah.
and they were paying me to go into court and argue with people whose job it is to argue professionally. And it's like I thought about every like lawyer show I'd ever seen on TV. That's how I learned things. And so the way a trial works is that you get interviewed by your lawyer, right? And it's all pre-prepared. Like I had a list of all the questions and all the answers.
Uh-huh.
So he would ask me, I knew exactly what he was going to ask me. So
Mm.
that part is easy. And then the other side
Cross-examination.
cross-examines. And the point of cross-examination is that they are trying to make you into a non-credible witness. So they are trying to pick apart the things that you said. Oh, you said this, but isn't it true that? And so he was like, the sad thing is that this lawyer was not prepared. And so everything he said was wrong. And so like they would put up a screen with a bunch of the UFC games I worked on. I don't know what their point was, but it was like every UFC game that I didn't work on. And so they were like, "Are these the UFC games you worked on?" And I'm like, "No." And so the training is you're only supposed to say yes or no, right? You don't elaborate. If you say no and they want to know why, they have to ask you, right? So you're trying to give them no information. So for 10 minutes this goes back and forth where he's like, "Well, didn't you work on the UFC games?" And I'm like, "Yes." "Well, did you work on these games?" "No." And then they're like, "Okay, can you explain why well, actually I worked on the Dreamcast game, which isn't on this list." And so this goes on for like an hour. And basically, for me, it's like a game. I'm trying to give this guy no information. That's the job. And that's what a witness does. And so everything, I mean, the guy would throw up sales numbers and go, "Is this a Trist, sales data report?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Like, I don't know what this is. You just put a paper up on the screen. I don't know what it is." And anyway, it just goes on and on. And normally there's a third phase where your side asks you questions again to clarify whatever it is that the other side thinks they found out about you. And they were like getting ready to do it, and then the guy said, "No, you can just leave." He's like, "Actually, because you literally gave them nothing, there's nothing for us to recross." Um, so it was really fun.
All right, you won. You won it
I won.
trial law. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, we didn't win the case.
Oh, you didn't.
Yeah, that was the
Oh,
sad thing. The lawyer, it was one of the biggest law firms in America, and the lawyer told me he'd never lost a case. So I was so excited. And at the end, what had happened was THQ had released another MMA game about 5 years before. And there's some legal concept, and I'm not a lawyer, but it was kind of like, why didn't you complain then? Why did you wait until now to complain about this game when you should have exerted that right 5 years ago? And that was the lawyer's decision, the judge's decision. But it was great. In the middle of it, the judge asked me a question. This judge is allowed to do that. It's his courtroom. And the other side objected. And I guess you're not really supposed to do that.
Objected the judge?
Yeah. And the judge was like, but you can't do that. Like, what are you doing? And of course, and then all the lawyers get into this whole thing where they pretend they're all outraged at each other. And I was just sitting there, like, trying not to laugh because
Oh
it's just
God.
a whole situation.
Where do
And
you go from here? Now I want, like, what if we can get you to testify in front of Congress? Like, that's the only next
no,
level. We gotta.
I'm not that smart. And I've done some other expert witness work, and it's super fascinating. There's this game called Heroes Charge. It's all very public, right? That there was this massive three-way lawsuit that Heroes Charge was a clone of a Chinese game, which was called Dota Legends, which was a clone of all the characters from Dota.
Mhm.
And so Blizzard was suing them both, and the Chinese company was suing the American company because they ripped off the Chinese game. And so I was involved in that case also, which again, I'm not sure which side. I think everybody lost in that one because it was just this crazy round robin thing. Um, but yeah, like I said, it's super fun work, and I guess there's a part of me that like enjoyed taking all of my experience and like using it for something.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Is that like, are we caught up to present day? Is this where you are now?
I mean, Big Boat has had all kinds of crazy activities over the years. Like I said, I worked as a contract producer for a company in LA called Spin Master.
Mhm.
Um, you may know them. They make Tech Deck and Bakugan. The Bakugan were like this huge toy for years, and so they had this toy called Sick Bricks, which is a like a little like Lego characters. And the idea was we made a game and you could point your phone at the character and it would visually like scan the character into the game. And then there were like it was like Skylanders, right? There were like 50 different characters. And then we built this game where you had all the different characters. And so I was like contract producer on that game. And it was a team in France who made this visually beautiful game. It wasn't on time, which was kind of a French stereotype. Apologize to anyone from France who's watching this, but it's true. And so, I would go do that for a year, and then I would go back to,
Yeah.
while I was doing that, I was doing biz dev, trying to find the next project for Big Boat. In the middle of all that, I hooked up with a team in Estonia that I really liked working with, like a small indie team, and they were very agile. And so what I did was I stopped doing this like random contractor thing and focused all of my development to this team that I basically made like a long-term partnership with.
Uh-huh.
And so that made it a lot easier for me that I could go and find the work and I kind of manage big picture, but I didn't have to manage the day to day as much. And so, that partnership yielded, I don't know, 10 or 12 small projects. And then kind of the last big boat thing was, remember when I was at Activision, I worked on Battlezone. So 15 years later, Rebellion in the UK buys the rights to Battlezone from Atari when Atari's selling off all their IP. And they come to me. I'd worked with them on AVP, so I knew the Kingsleys, who are the owners of Rebellion. And they said, look, we have this thing. There's this Activision game. It's never been on Steam. Can you help us get this game onto Steam? Like, what should we do with it? And I had the original art director, the original one of the original gameplay programmers were people that I had talked to all the time, and I called them up and said, "Hey, what do you think?" We put together a pitch that was like, level one, just stick it onto Steam. Level two, like stick it onto Steam and make it work. Or level three, like redo all the art and make it into like a great game. And they said, okay, you just go to level three. Like, let's do it all. And so we spent about a year and a half. For that, I built a team that was like maybe 8 total.
Mostly contractors, probably.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like, I was building the Big Boat team at that point, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, they were all contractors, right? Because I don't have employees,
Yeah.
And so we had a couple of great engineers, and we ripped the old game apart, but we kept the same engine, right? So we just basically ripped out all the asset pipeline and put in, like the old game, the tanks were like 100 polygons, and then we built 10,000 polygon tanks, and we redid the terrain, and basically really just polished the heck out of this beloved classic game, and to kind of appease or to satisfy the hardcore fans of the game, we kept all the gameplay, identical, and they were very happy about that, right? But we had this game that now ran perfectly well on Windows 10 and had modern shader-based, graphics, and we didn't have the benefit of something like Unity, so we had to rewrite the renderer and create all the shaders and all that. And so that was kind of a success, and it was work that I really enjoyed doing. I mean, if you followed the story, when I worked on that game in 1997, I'm very quick to acknowledge that I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, and it was like a huge failure for me. It was like this big, black spot on my career where I had taken this job and I wasn't really qualified, and so now 17 years later, I'm doing this giant do-over.
Yeah.
This same game, and I'm like taking that game and kind of redoing it, and so it was kind of like this. I don't know. I mean, like I probably at the end of that I should have just died, because that was like my personal.
I'm glad you didn't.
Uh,
It's good that you got to redeem yourself for something that you regret. That's awesome.
yeah, so we did that, and then we did Battlezone 2,
Oh,
which I think was a little less of a commercial success. I mean, Battlezone was always kind of a weird game, and it wasn't a huge success in 1997. So here it was all these years later, not a big success. But it let me build this great team. I had this great group of guys I was working with, and yeah.
and
So that was I don't know, now maybe like 3-4 years ago. Um,
wow.
right now today, I am producing the remake of System Shock, which is again another like really old game.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a different approach. We're rebuilding it from scratch in Unreal 4, and it looks amazing. The art team on that is super talented. Like, I wish I had that art team on Battlezone.
How big is
Uh,
the team that's remastering System Shock?
I think like all in, we're probably about 15 or 16.
Huh. All right.
Yeah, and it's similar to Battlezone in that we've got this defined starting point. We are taking some liberties. There's a few things here and there where we're like, if you played System Shock, the old game, there would be like an email you'd get with a door code, and if you didn't physically like write it down on a piece of paper, you'd get to like later in the game and you didn't have it, and you wouldn't be able to finish the game because you didn't write it down. And so, we're like, maybe we should add a system to like keep track of some of the important clues and things like that, because games were hard back then.
Yeah. It was
Yeah,
definitely, well, you needed a reason to sell that manual.
that's right. And the strategy guide.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That was your DLC back then. You couldn't actually complete the game unless you went out and bought the strategy guide.
that's true. I still have some of those strategy guides. Like, that was a big deal back then, and that because there was no internet, and there was
Yeah,
no
I
you know
remember.
there was no website. So
Uh,
yeah, so that's what keeps me busy. That's my day job, and I've got my fingers in a few other things. There's always a few. My fingers are always in a few things. So yeah.
wow, this has been an extremely long podcast, so I will wrap it up soon. But I want to have you on again. I don't feel like we've scratched all the stories you have here. You've done
Uh,
a lot.
I haven't even told all the like the crazy stories.
Oh, well, that's good. We'll keep something for next time.
Some of them maybe not be appropriate for a podcast.
We will vet them ahead of time then. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I hope everybody out there has been thank you everybody who's been out there listening. This has been Gwen Frey and Mike Arkin, and you've been in the Dialogue Box. All right, so that's
Thank you
the
very much.
yeah, that was great. My God, you have a very long career. This is in after the fact quite intimidating.
I'm I always think it's weird if people say things like that because I'm
Oh,
just like,
sorry.
no, wait, but I'm intimidated by everyone else.
Yeah.
Like I'm intimidated by you.
That's ridiculous.
No,
I'm
I mean, like, you're young and successful, and like you have this incredible game, and made your Epic Store deal, and you're already more successful than I imagine. When you're 50,
uh, I'd
you
rather
will
not.
literally be like throwing lightning bolts.
Yikes. I imagine I will be on a podcast talking with somebody else who is confused about whatever. I can't even imagine what's going to change in the industry. Like I don't feel like I've the people who are on the bleeding edge now are probably the people in VR or something like that. I don't feel like I'll ever be able to be like, no, back in my day we didn't even have. Well, you know what will happen now that I'm thinking about it? Because a lot of the stuff you were saying was blowing my mind that it was so much harder back then in little ways. I bet things just do get easier. Like I bet engines become so powerful that a lot of the things that we take for like a lot of the bullshit goes away. Um,
I mean, think about
things
for
always get
most
easier.
for most of my career, there were no engines.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
like
at one point in your career, there was no internet, which is
there's
still
no internet. When I was at Acclaim, I was like, "Can we buy a modem so we can send files?" I had to like write a memo justifying buying a modem.
hmm. Yikes.
And then I remember at one point we had four. We had a BBS, right? Like so developers could upload files to the it was private BBS. And one like there was this funny thing where like the tech director for Acclaim when they changed all the things over to 800 numbers, which is like a free number.
Uh-huh.
And the next day, all the UK developers were like, we can't call an 800 number, right? And like, all of our games were developed in the UK. So I was like, oh, oops. But we used to sit there and stare at the screen watching the file download. Like, all right, it'll be done in about a half an hour. And then, we're like, and then we can burn the ROMs and test the ROMs and FedEx them to Nintendo.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it never changes. You still have like, I'm not gonna say which platform, but I was staring at a 2 hour upload speed for a 2 hour upload for one of my platforms.
I mean,
Uh,
it's the thing that I'm most fascinated about is that if you think about it, for um, a vast majority of my career, there was a very specific business model. You would pay a developer, they would make a game, you would put it in a box, you'd manufacture a million of them, and you'd put them on the shelf at Toys R Us.
mhm.
And at some point, not that long ago, right, the Toys R Us disappeared, the box disappeared, the developers disappeared, and the business of making games is so much different now, right? It's you make your own game, you put it on an app store or a PS4 download, or Xbox Live, and you try to survive doing that. And it's such a different world.
Yeah. I mean, it got easier and people can self-publish. It got easier to develop games. Now that there's engines, it got easier to publish games. People can self-publish on Steam and so forth. By the way, there's not many people here, but anybody in Twitch, you can ask questions now. We'll stop ignoring you. Sorry about that. But yeah,
We're on Twitch. We're on
yeah.
Twitch.
Oh, we're still on Twitch. I should have warned you about that.
I think that was is that the thing I'm looking at?
I,
Oh,
I
I guess it
think.
is.
Well, yeah,
But
when it gave you the link. Just,
it just shows me and like I don't see like normal. Oh, I see. I had it like full screened or
hello,
something.
hell on earth.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know how to use these computer things.
Nah, it's okay. Nobody really understands Twitch. Twitch is pretty weird. Hey, Fetragon, what's up? Yeah, Twitch is weird. Um,
Like they
it's
didn't have Twitch when I was a kid.
of course.
We had to get up on Saturday morning and watch cartoons.
Yeah, they didn't have Twitch when I was a kid either. And it's not even Twitch is weird because it's not really like TV like cartoons. It's more like a reality TV show that everybody's watching with a chat box. And so like imagine you're watching reality TV and also you can talk to the people. Who are the people who are watching can also talk to you. That's the way I kind of
So
think of it.
so there's a comment from Belly Arms, and how do I know if Belly Arms is still online?
You don't. They may be gone. I think that was a while ago.
No. All right. Well, too bad. Yeah, because I said I-76 about 4 hours ago, but it's funny because I-76 was a guy named Zach Norman was the creator of I-76. And years later, I kind of reconnected with Zach, and talking to Activision Minnesota, they were like, "Oh, can you do we want to relaunch I-76?" And there's Belly Arms. He's here. So Belly Arms, whoever you are, I'm telling you the story. I can't believe I'm telling a story to a random person on the internet.
I know it never gets
All
normal.
right. So I don't mean to sound like a crazy old man there for a second. And so Zach and I put together this amazing pitch for a remake. It was actually I-77 was the pitch. So originally there was a game called I-76, and then there was I-82, which was the 80s version of I-76. It was like much later, different characters, different story. And so Zach wanted to finish the I-76 story with I-77. And we pitched that to them, and they were like, they loved the idea. They loved the fact that it was Zach, who was the original creator. He was a, well-liked guy at Activision. And in the middle of that, they shipped King's Quest, and it was a huge flop. And they decided that they were not going to do any of the classic stuff ever again. And that was the end of I-76. But the pitch was fantastic. Oh, well.
Yeah. I think it's crazy that you've been on both sides of it, though. Like, I feel like the dark side is the publishing. What do you call it? I know people that have bounced between being a publishing producer and a developer producer, and people tend to have an affinity for one over the other. But I think you had a really good point in there. Something really salient is that you really won't understand until you've done both. People have questions for you, by the way. Somebody asked, "Have you mentioned? You mentioned you're working on System Shock remake in UE4. Are you working in tandem with the System Shock 3 development? And was
Yeah,
dev on that halted?"
I have nothing to do with what's going on with System Shock 3. And in fact, my knowledge of that is only what's been publicly, announced. I think I read that they were on hold, or they had wound down the team. It sounds like they got caught up in the whole, the publisher that went out of business.
Starbreeze.
Starbreeze, thank
Yeah,
you.
is that the Are you talking about the Are they called Otherworld?
Otherworld, yeah, that's Warren Spector's team, and
Yeah.
I've met Warren a bunch of times. Nothing to do with System Shock. He's an amazing guy who's got an amazing career, and you should get him on here. And so yeah, what we're doing is just System Shock 1, and what we're doing is totally separated from what they're doing with Shock 3, which is obviously a new game. Yeah.
Fetragon asks, speaking of things getting easier, someone's creating a machine learning program that allows you to design levels with just text. Oh, okay. That's not a question.
That sounds kind of neat. I've worked on some games where we had like algorithmic level creation, where you just like a top down. We did one of the first iPhone games was this top down car game. It was kind of like a ripoff of Super Sprint, the old arcade game, and we just wrote a bunch of parameters, and then the thing would just spit out like 100 levels, and then we would just kind of pick the best ones, and so that way we could do all the level creation without a level designer. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, I've heard of other people doing kind of like RNG and then refining it. I'm trying to think of Bethesda, I think, did some stuff like that. I remember seeing some talks from them. Or
The tip was that we would randomize and would like create like 1,000 levels,
Mhm.
and then we pick the best ones and just save the random seed from the ones that we liked.
I
So they
see.
were generated randomly, but we were choosing which ones. So it wasn't like every time you play they'd be different.
I see. Interesting. I think somebody told me Into the Breach was actually, I don't know if they randomly generated them, but I always thought that game was random and it was entirely handcrafted levels that are.
See, I've got a story for everything. The FTL guys were two kids, and one of them was the son of the guy that ran operations at Acclaim. And when he was like 10 years old, he used to come into Acclaim, and Acclaim, all the development was in the basement. But we had every Midway arcade game in the basement. So like I had like a Mortal Kombat and the Terminator 2 machine like sitting against my cube. And so he would come in and hang out for hours and play all the video games. And so years later, many years later, I saw this FTL game, and the name looked familiar, and someone was like, "Oh, that's Johnny Ma's kid," and I was like, "Oh wow, I met him when he was 10,"
Wow.
and um, and they had enormous success with FTL. It's a really fantastic game, really fun, really hard. I've yet to finish it. Still playing
Yeah.
years later.
I mean, you got to move on now, man. They've launched Into the Breach. That game's phenomenal.
Yeah, I know, and I have Into the Breach. I think it was like one of the free Epic games,
Yeah.
so it's on my free Epic game to-do list, which has like 100 games on it now.
Yeah. That they're picking some really good games. I'm surprised. Like the quality bar is real high for those free games on the Epic Game Store.
Every now and then they surprise, like I'll see some like weird indie game that I just kind of chuckle. I mean, I still get it because it's free,
Uh-huh.
but then every now and then, like this week, I think it was the what's that zombie game?
Day
Uh, Wo-
Zero.
World War Z.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was like, oh wow, like that's something at one point I was going to buy. So that's thank you, Epic. Thank you, Tim. Thank Tim for everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm grateful for Epic as well. Obviously. Uh,
I'm right
oh
with you.
yeah, you're sporting the Unreal Engine. There it is. I think I got my sweater back here. They pay us in swag. Uh, this is an industry that will clothe you very rapidly.
I'm actually switching away. I'm throwing away a lot of my game industry T-shirts and like trying to actually have a normal wardrobe now. I've had a succession of girlfriends and eventually my wife who each tried to purge the closet of you know
It'll
crappy free
creep back in. It's like a
crappy.
it never ends. All right, I think it is time for me to roll out, but I really do appreciate you being here. And thanks everybody in the Twitch chat for hanging out with us this whole time. This is
Yeah,
kind
thank
of a
you
lot of
so
fun.
much for the invitation, and it was a lot of fun. I love talking about myself, so that was really a pleasure.
No, it was like this has been pretty mind blowing. It was cool getting to know you, man. Like
Yeah, me
we should
too.
do this again because I'm sure we'll have more stories.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right. So thanks. Goodbye, everybody. And goodbye, Mike.
I don't know how to hang up, by the way.
I'm gonna hang us up.